Good morning if you're in Los Angeles, or good evening if you're in London. The purpose of these live streams is to publicize and go back to home economics and to recognize that we live in a peasant and property class society now where the gal simply can't afford to make ends meet. The single mom and the single dad. And to get you to start chiming in on the live chat, if you're a single mom and you have a job and you have children that are looking to you for stability and food and clothing, and you simply don't make enough money to make ends meet, you're not going to. It's just the way it works out right now. We recognize, and so we're trying to get you to gather our gang together and call in and let us know how much money you make and how much money is groceries and clothing and food and rent. Although you shouldn't have to be paying rent, you should be living in a house. That's how you get a detached house in the post-World War II 1950s America. It's intentionally designed around the family as a base economic unit. And if you're a guy, to call in and tell us how much money you make, and then as importantly, or more importantly, how many hours you would have to work if you were going to come up with a family budget. Let me remind ourselves that there was a revolution in this country, and it culminated in the 1970s, and that's why we went from home economics to individual rights, where the guy made enough money to support a wife and children, and then he didn't. And there was a split. It was their choice to either cash in on everything and become the upper class in a peasant and property class society, or they could have gotten onto a maintenance level. They could have maximized benefits and utilities by willing the good of another person. And to that end, if they had done that, then today the world would look completely different. There would be very little poverty, and the standard of living, especially in the United States, would be very high. Let me go back and point out just what home economics is. Home economics is when the married couple is viewed as a base economic unit. And so you picture a transistor on the computer you're listening to this on, and you go up to the computer and you take out a transistor, and you take out a second transistor, and as you take out the third transistor, it's no longer a computer, it's a pile of electronic parts. You put that transistor back in, it's back to being a computer, and there you go. That's the family is a base economic unit. It's the opposite of poverty. It's what gets you out of poverty and into plenty. And so you ask the gal, for example, how many oranges she wants to use throughout the year. And now you know how many oranges to plant in order to get everybody into a world of plenty. Picture that detached house in 1950s America that, even though they had a lot of work to do, they were trying to, it's designed very intentionally. It's not how houses are designed today, just so it said. It's designed intentionally for the person to live in it comfortably, the married couple, and to raise children. They put a lot of effort into saying a living room has to be so big and a bedroom has to be something like 10 by 12 feet for two children of the same gender, and there's a dining room and a kitchen to supply the dining room, and a bedroom and a backyard, and they really got into it. There was a place just for dad, maybe a bench in the garage, and there was a garage in a house, a big American car, a station wagon that was viewed a lot like a farm truck. It was intended for the household to run around and to get as a unit. That's different from the way how cars and houses are built today and cars are built today. And the same with the gal. She had her own private spot. I remember an architect saying that he could design a house where a married couple would be divorced in about 6 months, or they could live happily ever after. You have to put some effort into it. And so that's how you got home economics and professors of home economics and that sort of thing. Go back to the 1950s and picture a typical American house, maybe out of one of the old TV shows or some such thing. Now, daydream a bit. Go off to the side and start with farming and mining. Then above that, manufacturing. Then above that, wholesale, retail, and repair. And above that, recreation, education, and one other thing I forget. And then doctors and lawyers uh, form a lattice that hold it all together, and um, the parish priest, the Catholic priest, causes it all to come into being to begin with. This is all a Catholic shtick. It's you have to be normal and well adjusted. You arrange everything to get to heaven after you die, and that sort of thing. It comes out of monks in monasteries and popes in Europe. This is the God and this why they call it God and countries. It's a very distinct, unnatural religious thing. That is, it goes against Mother Nature and against your human nature in a very real way. And so, in order to go back to this, you have to stand up for it. God and country is made up of three things. One is straightening out your emotions, and everybody's emotions are screwed up. Is it okay to discriminate against homosexuality? Yes, it's okay to discriminate against homosexuality because you're obligated, if only for religious reasons, to discriminate in favor of the gal who changes the dirty diapers, gets the sex. She gets the, if she's going to change the diapers, she gets the physical pleasure and she gets the romantic part of it, and it all lines up. In fact, it all comes out of her mind. And so you make a very big deal out of that gal. You make a very big deal out of the common housewife and the Catholic nun. And if you do, then society changes and all these good things happen. Kids have shoes on their feet. People are pulled out of poverty. And so the idea is to go back to home economics. That's not what we're talking about, gals. That's not what the women's liberation movement did. They did just the opposite. I drifted a bit, so excuse me. They God and country is made up of straightening out your emotions and then willing the good of another person. You make money by making somebody else better off, and that's not what happened in the consumption society. And then they go together like two segments of a line that form the lowercase letter I, and that dot on the letter I is religion, is Christ rising on the third day. And there's something to it, isn't there? There's a distinct emotion. They call it an infusion. You try and tune into something out there, and you hold that as begging the question. You hold that as faith, and if you hold that as faith, then you start to act reasonably. You act reasonably, and you act decently. If you change the scale, other things happen too. Catholic priests, judges wear black robes because Catholic priests 500 years ago in England wore black robes, and it was the judicial establishing facts that are true, as opposed to the sophistical establishing facts that aren't true as true. And so, at least for a while there, the people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people were the very definition of what defines a bad guy as a bad guy. And people who practice virtues were considered the good guys. The laws not only stood up against people who hustle, but they stood in favor of people who practice virtues. You push mom and dad to the top. You push the average citizen to the top. You are a normal, well-adjusted person, race relegated to an endearing quality of your parents, and that sort of thing. And then you became, if you chose, you became a mother, or a wife and a husband, and a mother and a dad. Motherhood is considered a profession. There's Susie in St. Louis, and if she chose to be a common housewife, she chose that as a profession. And they put a lot of importance on this, including training for it, taking classes in home economics, and something else terribly important for us, the ability to live in a house. It was professional moms and dads and amateur tennis players, as an example. Instead of professional athletics, it'd be amateur athletics. And tennis, by the way, is one of those things you can look at If you go back to the 70s, when all of this sort of came to fruition, uh, professional tennis came into being, Billie Jean King and all those gals. If you take a second look at it, you realize something terribly nightmarish. For one thing, so many of those gals took male steroids, so many of them became lesbians. And they had the open era of tennis, and they threw out the housewife. They literally forced a choice. The gal who would turn around and go back to ask the 10-year-old what he wanted for his birthday was thrown out of society. And so there was there's an example of malice. There was a celebration of malice. And they used cigarettes as a sponsorship when everybody was trying to get people to quit, to not smoke. In other words, they just pegged out. They did everything horribly. A celebration of malice is a good expression for it all. And there are consequences to it. They just pegged out. People had to start working more hours. People started plunging into poverty. You have the Billie Jean King Tennis Center, and you have a gal who's a lesbian who's married to another gal, and she fought like mad for the rights of women. And then you realize she didn't really fight for women. She fought for women who were malicious and against women who practiced virtues. She has everything in common with the guys at the time who were malicious, who got into all the gold and real estate they could. And perhaps the civil rights movements, they got on the gold and drugs and everything they could get their hands on. And when it came to the black civil rights guys, look how many people ended up in housing projects in Chicago and Philadelphia. All the leaders of them ended up very well off. If I take a step back and have a sense of category along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil, which is Catholic, but then you realize that people who were evil, people who are who have no sense of love in them, no sense of guilt, no sense of empathy, rose straight to the top. I even remember at the time in the 1970s, listening to the news. There was a guy named Dan Rather who would give the news. There were 3 networks and there were 3 major news anchors. And he was one of the guys they would criticize and yell at for not being quite honest about things. And I remember he would stop every now and then, look up at the camera, smile a little bit, and say something as if he was passing the word to his group. And he did that, and he said, "We're in a consumption society." And then he went back to telling the news, and he wondered what in the world a consumption society is. I mention that because it was done intentionally, wasn't it? In the 1950s, the Communist Party said they would overthrow the United States by about the year 1973. They were very specific about it, and they were very good at it. They did it. And so things like the women's liberation movement and the civil rights movement and the John Lennon movement, the rock and roll stuff, everything else was one notch underneath that. And so if I take a look, people like Hillary Clinton should, the women's liberation movement should hate the guys who should hate the black civil rights guys, and the black civil rights guys should hate the white dandies that took over the place. Hillary Clinton should hate Bill Clinton, but they're married to each other. And they should hate Jesse Jackson, one of the civil rights leaders, but they all view themselves on the same side. If I have a sense of category, I realize that they're all, well, malicious. In fact, if I take a second look, without sounding however it's going to sound, go back to the courts. Those 3 things that make up God and country in our shop manual fashion: straightening out our emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because Christ rose on the 3rd day. What was it right about 1973 that courts came out and said, we decided that there would be no religion in government. And when they did, they threw out holding Christ, even if it was the United States, and we were founded on lots of those principles, I'm told. And they threw out straightening out our emotions. That was when homosexuality started to become popular. You're no longer mentally ill if you're homosexual. And in doing so, they threw out being normal and well-adjusted. You can add the diagnostic and statistical manual to that. And they made it okay to start making money by forcing other people to work more hours, getting gold, get into real estate. And when they did that, they uh, started the process of creating poverty in slums. Keep it up and our society will collapse. And it's just what they did. They institutionalized malice. They made it okay to hustle. And if I repeat all this again, they're the stereotypical, straight out of the textbook definition of a satanic church. Those courts in the United States, they just hustled everybody. The only thing we have left is a realization that going a few rungs down on the ladder, everybody in the United States still thinks still are trying to do the right thing. We're just hustled, and you have to stand up and face all this. In our group, we know what's wrong, what to do about it, and how to do it. And one of the things we have to do is to get you to stand up to all this without sounding too stereotypical. And however it's going to sound, there's Pontius Pilate during Easter, or when it comes to Christ, and there's Christ, and then there's the Jewish rabbis, and no reference to anything of today. There's the Jewish rabbis. And Pontius Pilate turns to the public and says, do you want to crucify Christ or not? And the public starts chanting, crucify him. In other words, it was the public. And we have to, you can't do that anymore. It has to come, some things have to come from the public on out. Some things have to come from the people themselves. And in order for any of this to work, in order for any good to happen, it has to come from you. You're just going to have to speak up. One of the things you have to do is to start saying, look, I can't do this anymore. First, hubby could support a wife and children, and then if he practiced virtues instead of militias, he started to have to work more and more hours. And then him and his wife have to work, and now they've institutionalized teenagers back in the workplace, and they destroyed the family as a base economic unit. And so you're sitting there, usually a gal by herself, not making nearly enough money, and you have little kids looking up to you for everything, and it just isn't going to work out. It will work out if you start speaking up. You can do something about it as soon as you start speaking up and saying enough is enough. A word of warning about all that: your emotion will never head in the right direction. Your gut emotion will let you down. The most famous of the famous, everybody from the Pope to the guys like Aristotle and Plato, they all say that. Your emotion is going to let you down. So be prepared for that. That said, the other good part of the emotions, the caring, the courageous, brave and strong, kind, compassionate, and just, you're just going to have to bring to the surface. And the same is true if you're a guy. You are in the United States, a normal, well-adjusted Joe, and a pillar of our society if you supported a wife and children. And then you were a white male chauvinist pig, and now you're a peon. And that's just the way it is. You better start speaking up for this. So we've had a handful of these live YouTube chat things. We have a YouTube channel, The Priest and the Pimp, and there's about 36 or so anecdotes that will present a position, and an Instagram and a Facebook group. And so if you hear this, please pass the word and get people together. If you'll start joining this group and start putting dollar values on this, then you can do something about it. We have a dependent personality here. We won't take over the courts and get ourselves a Cuban cigar or and declare ourselves in charge. As an example, we'll get those courts to go back to God and country. We'll find those people and hold them accountable for it. And then we'll turn around and find some poor slob of a criminal trial attorney that defends the poor and the oppressed. and will have a dependent personality, will insist that he goes and he becomes in charge. Will insist that he lives in a doctor's and lawyer's neighborhood, will insist that he takes Wednesdays off, and will insist that he plays in that silly tennis tournament they have every year. And that's how you fight this sort of thing. So what's wrong? They threw out God and country. What do you do about it? Well, you get the courts to go back to God and country in a very real way to institutionalize the Apostles' Creed. If I can't have a judicial court without Christ rising on the third day, well, okay, this guy died and he came back from the dead and he rose on the third day, and now I have a judicial court. Then it becomes the grand deduction. Society is made up of citizenry who are normal and well-adjusted as good as they can be. And then they're made up of the summation of family units. And now you can answer lots and lots of questions in the most stereotypical shop manual fashion and answer them, and you can get things done. An example, should there be socialized medicine or should there be private medicine? And the answer is no, all the way around. You go to the courts, you throw them out of there, you replace them with our judges, and then you have society is made up of the summation of family units. And then to that end, there's a family doctor, a Catholic family doctor, a Yankee family doctor, and then you just put a Cadillac in his driveway, and that's all. That's what you have to worry about. And now take a second look. If that family doctor needs a nurse, start a nursing school. If he needs a secretary, start a secretary school. He needs a heart specialist, start a heart specialist school. If you make $10,000 a year and $1,000 of that goes for health and care for your wife and children, well, you go through the public sector and go through the private sector, or some combination of it. Who cares? Those are, according to Fulton Sheen, Bishop Fulton Sheen, those are incidentals raised to absolutes, and you don't do that. They're incidentals. And you couldn't care less if you go through the public or private sector. Everything changes, doesn't it? Picture a household unit, picture that stereotypical, normal, well-adjusted couple in there. And everything centers around that couple. And some of those couples will be a medical doctor, get him everything he wants. Everything else is underneath that. Well, you get the idea. I hope you pass the word. I hope you're listening to this. And you start, if you know somebody who's a gal and she's working and she has children, ask her to start chatting in. We need to know how much money you make and what to do about it. And if you're a guy, how many hours would you have to work in order to make ends meet? You can do that, then we can get started. We can do something about it. So, like I said, there's Instagram and a Facebook. Time to Act are the names on that group, and The Priest and the Pimp on YouTube. And we'll try like mad to go live at 11 o'clock Los Angeles time and 4 o'clock London time. 7 o'clock London time, and then on Saturdays, on Sundays at 8 o'clock Los Angeles time and about 4 o'clock London time. And I was trying to go either Fridays or Mondays, but I have a problem. I do so much babysitting that I run into problems. Like, you can't have a straight time, a scheduled time. And I certainly don't mind babysitting. It's kind of lots of fun. I very much mind the reasons for it. And you know why, just like everybody else, whether you're in London or LA, they can't come up with enough money. The moms can't come up with enough money to pay a daycare gal to raise her kids. And it's just horrible. It is horrible. It's what made other countries a terrible place to live and the United States a terrific place to live. Well, you get the idea. Somebody better start listening to this. Somebody better start passing the word and joining our gang in the playground. I hope you do.